Hey guys, it's Chris with Chris Streaming Code. So today we're going to design and build a calculator. So as I mentioned in the last vid, um, I wanted to not just tell you here's the parts of the calculator, but I want to actually walk through how I figure out what parts it is and how you can figure out what parts to build, because that's kind of the trickiest part when it comes to programming. Lots of tutorials for, here's what an if statement is, here's a variable, here's a loop. And then there's tons of tutorials like, here, follow this paint by numbers to build your own program that's exactly like my program. And there's no real middle ground. So we're trying to fill in that middle ground. So we're going to build a calculator today. So we're going to build a basic, 10 number, 3 operation calculator, kind of like Windows, except we're just going to do the numbers, the decimal, and these buttons for now, and clear. So kind of simplified calculator. You can always add on to it more. So let's get started. So I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to use this basic web template, which you can grab from my GitHub if you want to use it to start your own. It's just kind of a basic framework for just us to get started, so we don't kind of have to, at this point, worry about the nitty-gritty underneath stuff of setting up a build pipeline and stuff. There's a lot of code. We're going to clone a copy of this repo. If you're not familiar with Git, you can use Git Desktop or GitHub Desktop if you're using GitHub, and you can go clone repository, and you can paste in. Oh, you're right. There we go. Sorry. I normally don't use decoy. I use command line. So we could clone it there, and you could choose a folder for where to clone it into. Or you can use command line, which I'm going to do. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to right-click and do git bash. It's going to put me one folder down, so I don't want to be in that folder. I just want to be in this folder. So // go up one directory. I'm going to do git clone. And I'm going to right-click and paste. Whoops, nope, because I selected stuff. And that changed what I copied. Copy the URL. Right-click, paste. All right, and then clone. Oh, right. So I already have one called basic web template because I created that. So we're going to call this one calculator. Okay, and now I have my calculator folder with stuff. I'm going to open it up in WebStorm. So WebStorm is by JetBrains. I have a whole video if you kind of want to hear my spiel about IDEs and stuff. I really love JetBrains stuff. I used a bunch. It's the one I like the best. This is a paid product. You can get it for free if you're a student, though, or a teacher, I'm pretty sure. Even like college level and stuff, or high school and under, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that, but hopefully that's true. Yeah, so you can check that out. If you can't or don't want to use WebStorm, there's you can use any IDE you want. None of what we're doing is IDE specific. So Visual Studio Code's an awesome free one. You can use even the Notepad if you want. I don't recommend it because Visual Studio Code is free and it's way better than Notepad. But use whatever you want. So I'm going to use JetBrains. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to open up that new calculator project. Okay, so here we go. So you can basically ignore all the files in here except these 3. So source client index.js, and then the index.css and index.html in public. All the other stuff is kind of doing stuff for you. And then we're going to open up a terminal. So in JetBrains, I can open up terminals right here. If you can't do that, you can always go to your folder and hit File. And it may be Open Windows PowerShell. It may be Open Command Prompt. I think PowerShell. Let's just find out. I've never actually tried. Should though. Okay, good. It does. And when we first pull it down, we're going to want to run Npm Install once. All of this is in the README if you want to read that. Basically, we're just going to run Npm Install once. This is going to install a bunch of dependencies that we use for the build pipeline. We're not going to worry about what and how and all that. But we're going to do that, and then I'm not going to use PowerShell for this, but you can keep using PowerShell or command line if you want. I'm going to run npm run get. And it may yell at us the first time because I kind of have a bug, but it kind of gets over it. So now we're listening on port 8000. So I'm going to go to my browser. We'll do localhost 8000. And so now it's there. When we hit F12, we go to network, and I see it load up stuff. We have index.html is empty, so let's just go pop something in. So I'm just going to add a header tag, header 3, or heading rather. Heading 1, calculator. And we'll just refresh, and there we go. We have our calculator. So as we type things here, we'll flip to the browser, refresh, we'll get to go. Okay, so we don't actually need that. So now, let's talk about what we're going to build. So, like I mentioned, we're going to build a calculator like that. So, let's kind of draw the calculator. Okay, so, can't seem to draw a straight line. Okay, so first, our calculator, we're going to have the box. We're going to have input. So this is where numbers are going to go as we type them. Then we're going to have buttons. And so calculator buttons, the number buttons, are oriented just like on your numpad if your computer has a numpad. So one, we start. Oh, wait, somehow I ended up on rectangle. Oh, there we go. Okay, it's magic. Alright, not sure what was up. They're technical glitch. Those happen a lot in the program. Hopefully not a lot to your hardware. Okay, so we got our numbers. And we're going to we'll do a double line for 0. And we'll do a decimal here. And then let's go ahead, we'll have our operators over here. So we're just going to do the 4 basic plus, minus, multiply, and divide. Okay, so we're going to have those. And then we're going to just have, let's just say we'll have a clear button. We'll have a great big equal button. Because why not? So this is going to be our layout, and then these will be 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so we have our calculator. And then, so this is what we're going to what we want it to look at. If you're working for a real company, you probably get this document from someone, either a designer or something. Of course, if you're making your own program, you're the designer, so go nuts. And then let's talk about what things are going to do. So if we hit a number, this will add to value. So we would hit this button and show up here. If we hit one of the operators, it would, we'll call it start the operation, because it doesn't really do anything until you type in the second number. So we would say we start out, we hit 789, we'd have 789 over here, then we hit the divide button, and kind of in the background, it would still show 789, but now we would be dividing. And then if we hit 8 again, it would instead of going 789, 8, it would clear this out and become 8. So, and then we would hit the equal sign, which will actually perform the operation. So it wouldn't do the math until we hit equal. So perform operation. And then clear will just kind of reset us. So those are kind of our basic requirements in decimal 1. Now, of course, we'd only be able to have 1 decimal. So these are kind of our requirements. Again, if you were working for someone, you'd probably get this from a project owner or maybe a product owner. Companies use both of those where it's super technical. technically they mean something different. A lot of companies use them interchangeably. They're bigger companies and they have both roles. They may specify, but it's not kind of universal. But basically, if you want to cheat, you can call them a PM because project owner and product owner both have the same acronym. Yay! So your PM will usually give you some kind of requirements like this, or you may get a text prompt, which you get more often, in school and when you're learning. It'll be like write a program to solve this thing and blah blah blah. So however you get your requirements, whether they're a mock-up like this or it's paragraph, it's the same kind of process. We're going to want to go one step at a time. So instead of trying to worry about all of this at once, let's just start at the beginning. So one thing we know, we need a UI. So let's go ahead and we'll build that. That's just going to be some basic HTML for us with a little bit of styling to make it pretty. So let's go over. So we'll go in our index.html. So first, let's just get the elements on the page. So we know we need an input. So input. And I'm just going to add an ID value. We'll use these IDs to get a hold of the elements in our JavaScript later. Next, we're going to add a button for each of these. So let's go ahead and we will, just because it will kind of make more sense for programmatically, let's start with, or for not programmatically, but for us reading the program, let's start at 0, we'll go up to 1, and we'll sneak the decimal in between 0. So it's because it's going to go in our HTML, boom, 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 like that. But for now, in our HTML, it's going to be a list, so that's how we're going to explain. So let's start with 0, and then we'll do a decimal. I'm going to hit Control D, which is duplicate in my ID, and I'm just going to duplicate a bunch of these, and I'm going to put a number on each one. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so there's those buttons. We'll leave a blank line in between each kind of clump of related things. So now let's do our operators. So for these, we'll just go straight down the line. So we'll do plus, minus, multiplication, and division. So button, plus, button, minus, button. Multiplication, we could just use an X, or we could use the asterisk, which we use for multiplication programming. We'll be fancy. Let's go Google multiplication symbol. And then we're just going to copy paste it. And so we could do this. This is totally fine nowadays. Used to is kind of frowned upon because it may or may not work. You could also alternatively use the HTML entity code for it, which in this case would be &times. And that will show up when the HTML is rendered. It'll show up as the multiplication symbol. Anything that's kind of asterisk or ampersand something semicolon does that. But there's no harm nowadays unless you're working on some really old legacy stuff of using the code symbol directly. Go ahead and use the symbol directly because it just looks better. It's easier to understand. You don't have to think about it. And then let's do the same thing, division sign. Copy paste. Okay, so there's those. And now, finally, let's add a button for our C and equal sign. So C, capital C, and equal sign. Okay, so let's see what we have now. So come over, refresh the page. All right, well, that doesn't look like a calculator yet. We have our input, we have our buttons, so we have everything there. We just need to style it a bit. So first, let's go ahead. Let's add a div wrapping everything up so we can create like a rectangle around the whole calculator. So it'll be basically the div. So just this whole rectangle here. And again, we just want to go one step at a time. And over time, you'll get better at planning these out. Like if you were familiar with HTML, you probably could have just looked and known that you were going to need a div. That's something that comes with experience and time. So for now, it's a-okay to just take things one tiny little step at a time and add things. Now we have a div here. We're going to refresh. Of course, the div doesn't actually show anything. It's just kind of a generic container to logically wrap things up. So let's have some. There we go. So let's go ahead and we can see our div here. So, and just in case you missed that, I right-click and inspect element, and it opens up the element and shows it here. So we want some styles to our div. So one way, the main way I like to add CSS is to actually edit it directly in the browser. You can just click here and do things. So like I could get a bit like a background red. You can see the div got red. But it can be hard if you just tuck these on to get it out. Because if I refresh the page, that goes away. What's nicer to do is if you hit this plus sign here, it'll add one for you, and it actually figures out a selector for you. Sometimes the selector is good enough, sometimes it's not. This one's technically overkill because we don't need both the element tag name and the ID. I'm going to delete the tag name out of there, and it'll still target it just fine. And what it also does, it creates an inspector style sheet, which I can click here, and now I have like a whole file just to edit. And I can type right in here. So I can do background 0, and we can see it still modifies it. Now, be careful, if you refresh this page, this all goes away again, it resets. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead, we'll have our inspector style sheet. Trim that up. And what we're going to do is we're going to, before we refresh the page, once we have a clump of stuff, we'll copy all this and we'll paste it into our index.css file. And anything here will be saved. So now if I refresh the page, it's stayed put. And we'll just recreate it each time. And we'll kind of do it. We do not want it red. It would be an angry calculator. Okay. So plus style sheet. There we go. All right. Calculator. So now let's go ahead. So we'll start. We'll put a border around the whole thing. So we'll do border, one pick, solid 333. And if you're not familiar with CSS, there are lots of tutorials out there. If you guys want me to do some CSS coverage and talk about CSS, let me know. Happy to talk about it. For right now, though, I'm going to kind of assume that you know CSS, or either you know it or you don't care to know it right at this point of your learning journey. JavaScript's our main goal right now, so we're going to kind of blow through this kind of quick just so we can get this JavaScript, because that's the fun part right now. So I'm going to do a border. It's really wide because it's display block. So let's switch it to display inline block, and I'll shrink it down so it'll fit around the content. Now it's a little too clingy, tugging it a little too close. We'll add some padding, which will give us some gaps in between the border and the stuff inside the border. Let's go ahead and we're going to slap box size and content box on things. It makes it easier to size things. And because I like rounded corners, we're going to do a border radius. Yeah, that looks good. 8 pixels. And let's give it a background. Since I like blue, let's go blue. Don't want that blue because, yeah, nobody wants to stare at that. So let's just go with a pale blue. So we'll throw in even amount of red and green because these are RGB, so that's red, green, and blue. And it's hex, so F is the biggest number in this because it's little. That's kind of purple, so we'll tone down the red a bit. Let's try maybe C. There we go. That's a nice color. Okay, so there's our box. So now let's get our input on its own line because we want our input on its own line and we'll make it bigger. And I'm just going to go ahead. I'll pick. So just to see something, so we'll make that bigger. So let's go ahead. Our selector for that value. And again, if you don't know, hitting this plus sign will create a selector. May be good enough for you. It's a good way to start, at least if you get more comfortable creating selectors. So this one, we're actually going to change the display of this to block. And that's going to force everything else down into its own line. And input's a little weird. It has a width set, so we're going to have to manually say width 100%. Actually, it's a little odd because it's leading into our pattern. So I'm going to go hit elements. I'm going to click on the input. I'm going to see what things are affecting it right now because it looks like maybe the box sizing didn't get applied, but that did get applied. Sizing is only 2 pixels. Actually interesting. Immediately see what is taking up each space. Oh, it's because I don't want content box. I want border box. There we go. Content box is the default, which does that annoying thing that you just saw. It was adding the width of the border onto the input, so it was going more than 100%. So there we go. So that's good there. So that's the source. Okay. And you can see that any changes that are already in this inspector style sheet, I make them here, they show up here as well. So yay. So let's go ahead. Let's come up with the font size. Let's try maybe 24 pixels. Let's go a little bigger. We got the whole page to play with. Sure, why not? All right, and now let's go ahead. The box is a little cramped around there, so let's add some line height first. And the line height is basically, so your font size is how big the font itself is. The line height is how much space the whole line takes up. So it basically is added on to the font size, or it's the font size is part of the line height, but not the whole thing. So if I do 1, that hugs it real close, and you see it didn't change anything. So that's our default. So I'm going to do 1.5, and you can see that when I did 1.5, it expanded. So that 1.5 is 1.5 times the 32 pix font size. So that's what, 1648 pixels. Could also type 48 pixels, but I like to use the percent. That's a little tight. Let's go 1.8. Oh, that's good. Okay, and then of course calculators start from the right side. Text for some reason. So we'll do text line right. And then let's just try changing the font. Let's see what monospace looks like. This font we have now is font family. Pardon. Just because the other font doesn't look very calculator-y. It doesn't look super calculator-y. So that's not bad. We'll go with that. So that's good enough. Oh, and now let's nudge that over just a bit. I don't like to do that quickly. So we're just going to add a little bit of padding. None to the top and bottom. We'll say maybe 16 pixels left and right. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we got that. And let's go ahead. We'll copy and paste this into our CSS file just in case we accidentally refresh. We don't want to use it. All right, so I refresh it. So there, yay. All right, so now our buttons. So for our buttons, how we're going to do this. Whoops, such thing crazy. So we're going to do one box around these. And then we're going to do one around these. So when I say box, we're going to do a div around each one of these. And a div around. So we're going to have 3 groups of buttons. So let's go edit our HTML. We're going to give it, so we're still going to have the calculator div. So this div is going to be inside. And we'll call this number button, or we'll just call it numbers. Sorry, div, and then div, we'll call this operators. And then we'll just call this extra. Okay. So, yeah, numbers, operators, and extra. Okay. And again, that's not really going to change anything in our browser, or on our page. Well, it did shove it down because each of our divs is display block. And so that means that a block will clear lines. So we do get 3 lines, which actually we kind of want to undo because we want all 3 divs on one line. So let's go ahead and do that first. So what we're going to do, we're going to use display flex. And it's kind of a newer tool, display flex, relatively speaking at least. It's been around for going to do, we want one group to wrap around all of our buttons. So we're going to have one there. I'm getting kind of, okay. So we'll just do a div around all of our buttons. Okay. So, and we'll call this button. Very original. All right. So now I'm just going to right click, inspect elements, bring up the elements tab. I'm going to click on my buttons group. The plus sign, hit inspector, style sheet. And then, again, that is extra, so I'm just going to get rid of that. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to do display flex here. So what the display flex does is it basically makes it so the group can, like, self-arrange, essentially. It'll kind of, it could possibly let things grow or shrink to fill space or shrink to fit. But it also gets them on lines. You can see it actually, like, shoved them onto one line. And then we're going to do button div. So this will be every div inside of the button group. So that's going to be our 3 inner groups. And we're going to say, actually, we're not going to say anything right now. We might shift the size of them a bit later, but for now, that's fine. We're on one line. That's all we want. Now let's start with our numbers group. And so for these guys, we're going to want to get them on one line too. So we're going to do display flex as well. Except in this case, we do want to do something to each of those buttons. We're going to do numbers button, so we're targeting each button in there. We're going to do flex. And let's try, so we have 3 buttons per row. So let's try going, so I don't click into it every single time. Okay. We'll do flex 33.3. So I got that number just because I'm doing 100 divided by 3. And we're going to say, for now, we'll say 0, 0, 3, 3, or 33.3. All right. So this is shrink, grow, something, can't shrink, can't grow. Go ahead and set your basis to 33.3. And then I want to come back up to numbers, and we're going to say, let's wrap around. And then, so that tells it, so all my flexing things inside of here, go ahead and wrap them. So now we're kind of good, not quite. So we have all our numbers, they're taking up 3 columns, but they're upside down because we put them in upside down because that's logical. Also, our numbers are shifted because remember, we're going to make our O, or our 0, be twice as wide. So let's go ahead, we're going to put an ID on here. We'll call it 0. I can't use the number 0 here because I'm allowed an ID, so we use the word 0. And let's make sure we don't refresh. So, well, we need to refresh, so I'm going to copy this to our CSS. Okay, so that's big put, needs to refresh. All right, now I'm going to inspect element on the 0. And what we're going to do, that button 0, that's pretty good. Done it. 0. So now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do flex 0, 2, 3, 2, no. No, we'll do 0, 0, 66.6%. Oh, so because numbers button is more specific, we have to update our selector. And you can see here it's crossed out. That's how I know that this one isn't getting applied. So numbers button 0. So now this has the same specificity as this one plus a little bit. So it should be applying, but it's not. It doesn't have specificity. And that's mainly just because of things. two things. So I'm going to slap important on here just to force it to work. We're not going to include that important there. We're just going to make sure that it comes after our index CSS. That way this one's going to find naturally. But now you can see, now my button is taking up 2 space, and now they're lined up right. They're still backwards. So now, let's go back to our sources. I'm going to add another section for numbers. We'll smush them together when we flip that. I'm going to do flex. I forget the name of this one. So let's Google MDN. So MDN Mozilla Developer Network is easily the best resource for looking up web-related stuff, JavaScript, HTML, etc. So I always start my search with MDN. So MDN Flex, and we'll just pull this up. And there's a couple different ways to approach it. You could go into their learning thing and check the tutorial. I know what I'm looking for. I just don't remember it. So we're going to go into Flex, and I'm looking for the related. Flex direction, and also I think flex row reverse. I'm looking for, there's a way so I can, so we can do flex direction, not flex direction, flex flow. We can do row revert. No. I never actually flip them up, reverse them walls, or reverse them doors. Flex, yeah. Oh, right. Flex flow is flex direction of flex wrap together. So if I use flex flow, it kind of messes it. So we want, because we want flex wrap is already set. So we'll do flex direction row reverse. So that now lets our rows. We can't do this one. I've never actually tried this last night, right? I thought there was one that let us do rows and lift the rows. Well, random question. Let's go to Google. So, CSS flex, let's say flex direction row reverse column. Might not be possible in one group of flexes. I thought it was, but maybe we may have to wrap each row into another thing. Or we could do our numbers in reverse order, which actually, let's do some of that. We don't want to spend a ton of time on this. So, I'm going to zero down just because it's special, and we're just going to go backwards. So, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And actually, let's still put our dot at the end because we want it to the right of 0. Okay, so I did that. Let's go ahead and refresh with some CSS out there. I'm not going to keep that, okay? Okay, so there we go-ish. Direction, row, reverse. There we go. Oops, we should have left it down in the right place. We're going to reverse it. Okay, and then so go ahead. We'll copy that change in. Flex direction, row reverse, and then let's go ahead and add back in that number button 0 bit to make it 66.6. There we go. Now that's the right grid. Okay, so next, let's do our operators. So they're a lot more straightforward because I'm not trying to flip them upside down and inside out. So plus sign to give us the style sheet. Here, that is extra. Okay, so here we're going to do display flex again. And this time we're going to do flex direction column. And boom, now they're in a nice column. All right, so that's good enough for now. We'll copy paste that in there. Okay, and finally we're going to do our extra, which is basically exactly the same. We're going to flex it and then we're going to make it flow in a column. Direction column. And let's go ahead, and we said we want our equal sign, so let's go ahead and copy that over. We said we want our equal sign to be tall. So just to keep things simple, actually, let's do it in pure CSS. So we'll do extra button, and then we'll do the pseudo selector last child. So this will target the last child of extra, which happens to be the equal sign. And we're going to do plus 0.0075%. And boom. All right. And last but not least, let's go ahead for all three of our groups. Flex operators, extra. We're going to do flex gap. 4 pixels maybe? Oh, the graph is in the thing. Npm. Oh, just no, it isn't. No, but it is. Okay, gap it is. So that gives gap gives us a spacing between each of the flex things. That is I'm pretty sure. Okay. I did it kind of went through with our bit. So easy way to solve that is just so. Problem is we made this basically take up every last ounce of space, so that gap is extra, so it gets added to that, and then we're above the 3 that we want. So we're just going to drop this down a little bit, and you can see it kind of will only take up that much. And we'll do with 0. We'll just multiply this by 2. Because it's all proportional anyway, so as long as our proportions are right, it works out. And then we have a gap at the start, okay. We want to do. Alright, you know what? Let's change our approach a bit. Let's go. We're going to ditch the numbers. Oh, let's add a gap first. So numbers, operators, extra. And in real code, I like to put a new line between each project so it's easy to realize that it's affecting multiple. Gap, we'll say 4 pics. And then instead of doing this, we're going to do 2, 2, 0. Right, we don't need the 0. So that basically is kind of setting up proportion. Ooh, that would be ugly. Yeah, that one. Oh wait, hang on. Oh, nope. So a lot easier in my head. Apologies. Oh, that weird. now. Okay, and then let's put some margin in between. Do a margin right on numbers and a margin right on operators. Just the space fraction. We'll do gap on buttons as well. And now space out, should space out each of them. There we go. And let's set flex on every button and operators and number. Buttons, numbers, operators. Flex 1. This will make each of the columns kind of take up all the space and like do the buttons. And then oh, there's one flex on that. There we go. That did what we needed. Okay, except we could make this guy smaller. Let's go, we'll say this guy gets, so if we have 5 of them, we'll say this guy gets 60, so 100 divided by 5, and then times 3, so 20 times 3 is 60, and then each of these will get 20%. So, and that would, we want to go on the columns itself, so we'll say the buttons off of this is going to be something. So it's like 160 plus 120. Numbers. Did I just do that? No, buttons. Well, yes. Buttons is in the thing. So extra goes up here. Numbers goes up here. There we go. Now each column is nice and big. And now we got it shoved up too close. So we're just going to go on buttons, and we're going to add some margin top. Not to that one because that's all of them. Margin top, and we'll go. Where would we go up top? 20, 16 pixels. There we go. Okay. And then I'm just going to copy those changes. So change that one. And we. And make sure I put it in the right section. Okay. There we go. That's good enough. Well, and let's do one thing. They're kind of squashed and ugly. So let's just add button. So notice I didn't do a pound sign because I'm targeting the button element here itself. Button, hit plus sign, hit button, hit inspector. Okay. Let's make these look less like the default. Let's start with the background. Let's try just an almost white maybe. Maybe more almost white. Okay, let's do border. Let's solid. Let's do a font size. Let's make the font bigger. A little bigger. A little bigger. That's pretty decent. And then let's give it some line height to make it a little taller. Let's try 1.5 maybe. Maybe a little taller. 1.8 looks good. Oh, and I just noticed we want clear to be. Oh, I forgot to copy over equals extra little special bit. So we'll do operators child. Select 25%. slow. There we go. Let's copy that. And let's grab our button style. And actually, let's do one more style thing, just super quick. Last little thing. We're going to do a cursor pointer. That way we can actually see how it changes the cursor now. And we'll also do a button hover. And both cursor and hover are just good UI things because they let the user know that something's probably going to happen if you click this thing. And we'll just go, we won't go too dark. Maybe just F0. There we go. Now we can see, it looks like it's going to do something. And because I love border radius, okay. And just FYI, I am not a designer. So if you happen to be a designer and you are cringing at my overuse of border radius, I apologize. And my day job is a designer for a reason. Okay, so there we go. So there's our UI. So that's one step different. And you know what? Let's actually write out our steps. So we got. All right. So UI check. Okay. So now let's go ahead and let's get when we type one. First, let's start out. We'll just show the print value because that's a step unto itself. So that'll be our next step. So finally, we get the JS. Yay! Okay, so let's go to JavaScript. All right, so we need to show the current value. So if we're going to show a current value, means we need a current value. So let's create a current value. So we'll just do let. So we're doing let because this is our value we're tracking. So it's going to be changed. So we need let. We can't use const. Never use there. If you're reading a tutorial that uses there, run away because it's an ancient or outdated tutorial and they'll do you more harm than good. So let or const are your friends. Okay, and now what we'll do, let's get the actual value element. So we'll call it value element. I'm going to name this one const because we're only going to get it once and we're going to hold on to it forever. We're going to use document.query selector. And then, so this is how we get a hold of the actual element in our JavaScript for something in our HTML. And the selector for the select, maybe, there we go. Right click, move to opposite group. There we go. So the selector that goes in here is exactly the same selector as what we use in CSS. So again, if you don't know your selectors, you can do a trick of hitting this plus sign and see what it tells you. Or you can also see down here, so this is the full path, so if you do some combination of these things, you don't need all the words. That'll also probably get you there. So since we put an ID on it, it's easy to get a hold of. We can just do # value. So that's our value element. And we'll go ahead, we'll come to log and we can see that we got that element. So I saved, I'm going to just do that here. I'm going to refresh the page. I'm going to go to my console and see how it output that. So that's how I know that I got a hold of the right element. And notice when I mouse over it, it changes over on the left as well. So you can actually see Chrome will highlight which element we have. So we can tell real clear, yep, that's the right element. So we'll just go there. So it'd be handy to do that to check each of your things. So we have a value element. And for now, we're just going to, we'll keep it simple. We'll just say text content equals value. So this is in our final code for this. And it's complaining because I'm assigning a number to a string. JavaScript will cast it for us, so we don't strictly need to do this. I'm just going to put two strings to make it happen, which, of course, converts any value into a string. So now, text content would be if it wasn't an input element. Since it is an input element, we need to use the value instead of text content. There we go. Okay, so it's writing into it. So this isn't going to be good enough forever, but it's good enough for now. Don't worry about trying to be good enough forever. That's kind of one of the things that kind of starts spinning your wheels and over planning and things get annoying, and then you just give up. and go, I don't know, do something else. I don't know other jobs. I'm a programmer. That's all I know. But yeah, so don't try to plan too far ahead, and it gets easier too. You know, as you get more familiar, you'll be able to plan further ahead, and it'll just kind of happen naturally. But don't worry about it. So this is good enough for now. We'll need to change things, but we'll worry about changing them when we get there. So we accomplished another step. We show the current value. So yay, we're knocking things out of the park. All right, so now let's go add to the value. So to add to the value, we're going to need to add an event listener to each of our buttons. So there's a couple ways we could do that. The kind of manual way would be for each one of our buttons, we can be like document query selector, and we can be like 0, and then we could be one button element and blah, blah, blah. And we could add an event listener to each one. That is one way to do it, and that way is fine. It's more typing, but it is simpler, so you could do that. But what we can actually do, though, is we can assign an event listener to numbers itself. And because when event listeners fire, at least it's built-in event listeners, custom event listeners, you have to do something, but let's not worry about those. But built-in event listeners do what's called bubbling. And just like if you have bubbles in water, the bubble floats up. That's why we call it bubbling. When I trigger an event on a child element, it's going to bubble up through its parents. So if I click the button, it would go to numbers, and then its parent, which is buttons, and then its parent, which is calculator, then its parent, which is body, and then its parent, which is HTML. And then its parent, which is document. So that bubbling means what we can actually do, we can put an event listener on numbers, and so even when I click button, the button itself isn't going to handle it. We're going to let it bubble up to numbers, and then the number event listener will take care of it. That way we only have to add one event listener, which is awesome. So let's say numbers elements instead. Document.query selector, numbers, and just check numbers element. It's good to kind of check as you go too, because then you can make sure, like, you know, I could add like 50 lines of code in one shot without testing in between. But then if I have a bug, it's like, okay, is the bug on line 1? Is it on line 25? Is it on line 36? So if you kind of test a little bit as you go, things are a lot easier. So do numbers element. Got the right numbers element. We know we're good there. So let's move on. So now we're going to add an event listener. The numbers element dot add event listener. We're going to do the click event. So that's when a mouse clicks. And then we're going to add the event handler. So we're going to do what's called an anonymous arrow function. So we got our arrow function. We take in the event element. So in here, what we need to do now is we need to know which thing we actually clicked. Because now, I'll show you. So we'll do click. So, well, this will output now each time I click. So I click 3, we get a click. I click 5, we get a click. So far, so good. But we need to know, to actually do stuff with the code, we need to know, did I click 3? Did I click 5? Or even, if you look, like, I'm going to click very carefully in between here. And so I didn't even click a button, but see how my number went up on the right side? So because we're bubbling, number actually has the event, so anywhere number, including not a button. So what we want to do, first, let's make sure it's a button. So in the event that gets passed in to all event handlers, there are two target things. There's event.currentTarget and event.target. So current target is the element you added the event listener to directly. So in this case, that would be numbers element. Target is the event that is the first element that actually triggered it. So that's going to be our button in this case. So, and we can see that. Console.log. Console.log is great if you're not sure what things means, because it's super easy to use, and you can just type it and refresh your page and see what you get. So we're going to click 3. So you can see this is our current target, and this is the thing we actually clicked. And if I click each one, you can see you've got 6, got 1. I'm going to click carefully inside here again and see how it's both, because this is the one I directly clicked on. So what we're going to use is the matches function. So we're going to say if, So basically, if we didn't click a button, we click numbers directly. We don't want to do anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to say not if not event dot target. So that's the thing we actually clicked on. Dot matches, and then matches takes a CSS selector exactly like we're using here, exactly like we're using CSS. So if it doesn't match a button, we're going to return. So if this isn't a button, so not matches a button, we're going to return. We just won't do anything. And I'm going to go console.log click, and we'll just throw in target here just for funsies. So now I click my button, so it still does it, so we didn't fall out. I'm going to click in the little gap in between. Click. Notice I got nothing. So now we're not doing anything if I click here, and we're only clicking here if we get buttons. So yay. Now we need to write code that can handle adding the right number for each button. So a couple ways we could do this. One way, which I don't like, but I'll just show you. It is an option, and in this particular case, it's viable. In more complex examples, it isn't a great way to do it, which is why I don't want to do it now. But so we have our number in here. So what we could do, event.target.textContent, and if we console log that just to see what's in there, that's the actual text in there. So 96 dot, and then we could parse int that because text content is a string. We want a number because we're going to do math with numbers. So we would parse int that, and here's a little thing that's not super obvious. Notice how the text is black here. Well, but anyways, it's a number now. We can say type of number, and we can see that it's a number. Yeah, so we got a number now. And so we could then just add this to our value. And our value doesn't actually update yet, so we'll just say console.log value, just so we can see that it is changing behind the scenes. So 15 blah blah. You see that it's doing that. Dot won't work here. It's going to throw a non-number because we can't parse dot. So we will need to do a special case for our decimal no matter what. But the reason I don't like that is because it's not usually great practice to have the text or what you're displaying be linked to the actual data behind it. For a calculator, it's fine because you're never going to have text for the 9 button that's not 9. But you know, on a different thing, you know, if you had different buttons, like if these were like, say, people's names, we may have Smith here, but the actual value underneath is like lowercase Smith or something. So what I like to do instead, we're going to add a property here. So you can do these data properties. If we do the data properties, so we do data value, that would stick it on, I'm going to get rid of this text content stuff. So event.target, it puts them on the data set object. So any element that is data, or any attribute, sorry, the data hyphen something gets put into data set with this key. So it would be value. So if I click the 9, see, we can see it's got the map there. And note it is still a string, so we will still have to parse it. You can do that. Alternatively, you could not do that. And then if we did it that way, we'd have to use get attribute value instead. And this will read out there. Data value used to, for sure, in HTML4 be the preferred way. Now, in HTML5 got all kind of loosey-goosey, so it doesn't exactly have a super strong preference one way or the other, as long as you're not using something that is currently in use for something. Value is kind of iffy because some things like input definitely uses value itself to do things. We'll use data value just because if you're doing this in like a framework, some frameworks may have you use data, some may not. It's kind of dealer's choice, really. Like I said, it used to really matter, and data used to be for sure the right way to do it. HTML5 is like, yeah, kind of do whatever you want as long as it makes sense to you. HTML5 is kind of HTML is kind of hippie in its old age. Doesn't. So yeah, so we use data value 1, and let's say data value dot, and we'll say data value 0. Okay. So this way now we have them all linked. So we'll just say get value. Let's call this string value, just so we know very clearly. It's still a string. We can't use it as a number yet. But we can't just parse int right away because of our dot. So we'll do event.target dot data set dot value. And now we have our value here. So now, just real quick, we'll double check. It's always nice to double check. So there we go. We got a 9, the 0 still works. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So now let's first handle the dot. So if string value equal dot, make sure you're always using 3 equal signs. Don't do 2 equal signs. Some outdated tutorials or just wrong tutorials may do equal. There is a difference. It doesn't matter 99% of the time. That 1% of the time it does. It really matters, and it's really confusing and really hard to find. So always just use 3 equal. And you can even see most lint rules and IDEs will even warn you. See how it turns yellow? It's like, don't do the 2 equal. Just go ahead and use 3. So just always use 3. There are a few times you use 2, but they're not even worth worrying about until you've been coding for 4 years, because I've seen it like twice in my whole career. So if the string value is a dot, then let's skip that for now, because it's a little tricky before we can do numbers to make sure it works. So we'll just say if string value, then we'll do something else. So otherwise it's a number, and if you want, we can put else is a number, just to remind ourselves in the future. So here we'll just do value plus equals parse int string value. And so now, I right click, and now we'll do this bit. So remember I mentioned this isn't going to be good enough for now, because right now we're changing the underlying value, but we're not showing it. So now let's make it so we'll show it every time. So let's go ahead. We'll make a function because we like to be dry. We like to reuse code. We don't like to repeat ourselves, which is what dry stands for. Don't repeat yourself. So we'll make a function. So we'll do function update value. And we'll pass in a parameter new value. And then we'll do in here, we'll do value equals new value. So and then we'll do this part, which is the part that actually updates this text. So instead of doing this now, let's do update value plus parse int. So we're going to add the parse value to the value. We're going to pass that into update value. Update value is going to actually set it to the real variable, and then it's also going to update our display. And then just to clean up, I'm going to get rid of those extra lines. Okay, so I refresh the page. Oops. Why did we do this? Oh, because I never set. Now we're not calling it that first time, so we just down here we'll just call update value, and we just turn our value over to 0. And then technically we don't need this anymore, so we'll just get rid of that, just so we're not setting an initial value 2 places, so we don't need to know. So now once we've kind of set up everything, we're just going to update the value. So there's our 0 back, and now if I do 9, hey, look at that. Oops. That ain't right. Silly me. So you may have even seen this before I did. I'm adding the value, but we don't actually want to add it in a numerical sense. We do actually want to add it in a string sense. So what we'll do instead is, so we're going to have to parse the value because we're going to now pass in a string instead. So I'll move the parse int into this function, and we'll rename this new value string, or new string value. Doesn't matter which one we do it. Well, call it new string value. So we'll pass in a string, and then what we're going to do here, we'll do a template string. And so the first part will be value, and then the next part will be string value. And so we're going to tack on this to whatever's there. There is one gotcha with that now. If I hit 9, oh, no, actually there isn't a gotcha because we parsed the end. So what we ended up with was 0, 9 when I first hit it. But because we parsed it gets rid of that extra. So yay, this is actually pretty good now. So we have our numbers. We're not going to worry about what happens. It actually text out, so you can't tell, but the value is like 800 things long now. Oh, right. Oh, I went over the maximum number we can have. We're not going to worry about what happens when we do that right now. We'll just ignore that for now. Or whatever. But so now we got our numbers. So now for the dot, and actually now it's ironic because we're circled back. Now the dot can actually work with this code. So let's look back here. So there is one gotcha with this. Now is that, so dot doesn't actually matter. Ooh, what's that? So if I do 9 dot, our dot's not going to show up because what we're getting is 9 dots. And because there's nothing after the dot, it just gets taken off. So we kind of have two things we could do for this. One would be we could do .0 instead. Oh, and actually that goes away. Or what we could do is, and what we're going to do is, we could say percent 9. Oh yeah. Oh, does not have a built-in precision function. So we're not going to do, well, we wouldn't do that anyway. What we're going to do is, let's rewind again. We're going to have a variable to track, we'll call it isDecimal, and we'll set that to false for now. And so then here, we're going to say isDecimal true. So we got a decimal, or let's call it has decimal. Okay, and that's true. And then what we'll do, we'll use that variable in here. When we go to set the string, we're going to do another template function. So the first part is just a value, and then we're going to do a ternary here. So has decimal, question mark, dot, or empty string, nothing. So if we have that decimal, we're just going to tack it on at the string level. So our underlying value is still a number, but we're going to tack this onto the string for visual reasons. So 9 dot and that work. So let's see. Oh, because I forgot to update value. So we'll take the update value out of here. So we'll always update the value. We'll just have this little bit where we set that to true if decimal. So dot, there we go. Except, so that now didn't work because we had 9 as our value, and dot is true, so it looked like 9.5, but because the decimal isn't really part of the number, it got added to that, and the decimal for the wrong place. So we'll go back, and this is totally the kind of normal flow of things. Is you'll do something and be like, oh wait, that is totally normal, and you'll do it forever. So let's actually change things up just a bit. Let's create a function. We'll call it add number, new number string. Okay. And so here, instead of using update value for a second, I'm going to get rid of that. We're going to do else. So we're back to is a number. And then we're going to say add number. And then we're just going to pass in the number we're adding. And now this guy is going to, in here, it's going to look. So if has decimal, then we're going to, when we add it to the value, we're going to do value equals parse int, or not parse int. We're just going to do, we'll do plus equals. So we have the value. So if it has the decimal, we need to add a decimal number. If has decimal is true, which might not be a great name in a second. So we're going to add, we want to add a decimal. So to get, like, so if we have 9 and we have a decimal, we want to add 0.5. So we're just going to multiply our number, and let's just call this new number. We'll go ahead and parse int here because we always have to parse it. We'll say new number times 0.1, or you can say divide by 10, whatever makes more sense to you. I tend to like multiplying by decimals. So this is going to mean instead of adding 5 to the number, we're going to add 0.5 to the number. Otherwise, we're going to use the same bit of code that we've already been using to update our value. We're going to do value equals this. And this would be new number string instead. Okay. And now, so now we're going to not have update value, do the actual adding to value. So let's rename this. We'll say update value display. It's only going to update what we're showing. It's not in the underlying. And then we'll have add number call that. And we're not going to pass in value anymore. It's just going to always show just the value. And we'll still need this part for when we haven't added a number after the decimal. And then this part is for after we do. And for this part now, let's set has decimal back to false. We don't want this extra decimal on here anymore. And that's why I said it's not really a great name anymore, because now it's confusing because our value does have a decimal, but it's not that. So we're going to rename this. I'm going to use the built-in refactor tool of JetBrains to change it, because manually we'd have to change it in all these places and make sure we hit them all. JetBrains stuff and others have a refactor thing, and then they're pretty cool because if I rename it here, we'll say, let's call this has unused decimal. There we go. When I refactor, and sometimes it pops this up, sometimes it doesn't. It do refactor. See, it changed all those for me, so I don't have to worry about making a mistake. Okay, now let's see what we have. Whoops, we got a thing. So update value is not defined. Oh, I didn't use refactor. I messed up, and down here, update value display. And now because we're not passing in that number anymore, we're going to put it back up here, our initial value. Okay, so 9. Okay, so now we do have the 0 problem. Because I forgot to parse int right here when we added it. So I changed it from a string, a number to a string. Isn't great. Refresh. 9, yay. 2, yay. Point. Okay, so that bit didn't work for some reason. Okay, so that the new bit worked, and now. Oh. Okay, I'm not sure why it did that. One problem parse int gets rid of the decimal. Let's try parse. Whoa, that's better. And that can still be a int because that's from our number button. But when we do the actual value, there we go. Okay, now let's implement our clear next. I keep trying to use it. So we'll do 9 points. So that's not showing up anymore. So let's go look at that. So let's kind of trace our code. So we click, we get here, we have so add number is now calling update value display, but that means this bit never calls it. So we're going to we'll get rid of that, and we'll call update value display ourselves for decimal. Okay, so 9 point, yay, okay, 3, yay, 5, yay. All right, so we can add numbers. So let's go. We just checked off another one of them. Okay, so now let's go implement our clear button because I keep trying to use it. So just like we did with the numbers button. So clear button is its own thing. It's not related to equal. So we will just put this directly on the clear button. So let's go add an ID so we can grab hold of it easily. So ID, we'll call it clear because C is not a good variable. So clear element equals document dot query selector clear. I noticed how in my code I'm kind of grouping things. I'm grouping all the document query selector things together and all the variable creations together, and I group the const with const and let with let. And it helps keep your code organized. So we add the clear element, and now down here with the event listeners, we'll clump all the event listeners together, and then do clear element dot add event listener. Click, and then we'll do event. Actually, in this case, we don't actually even need event because we're not going to be using event.target. Just it does the clear thing. So here we're going to to clear. That basically just means we're going to reset. So we're going to set our value back to 0. So value equals 0. And then we have to call update value display to update the value. And usually, too, this is one of the main reasons that you'd want to use a framework like React or Lit, because it'll handle this updating the value for you. But when you're doing it yourself, you have to actually remember to do it every time. So we've got 9.35, okay, and clear, and we're back to 0. Yay! All right, that was easy. All right, so let's go back to our list of stuff, and yay, check, we're done with that. Okay, so now let's do the operators. So we have 4 different operators. So let's go ahead, just like we did with the buttons, let's add something here because I don't like to use this bit. So we'll say data, just say data, words are hard. Data operator. So, and then we'll just use a word. So we'll say add data operator subtract, data operator multiply, data operator divide. Okay, so we got our operators now. But because all of these are kind of similar, at least in the beginning, we're going to do just like we did with the whole numbers thing. We're going to do the same with operators as well. So we're going to do, I'm going to clump these together so they're similar. Operators element equals document.query selector operators. Okay, and I like to also, when I have lists of things and then a list of related things, I like to mirror them. So because I put operators in between numbers and clear, I'm going to put it down here also between operators and clear. You don't strictly have to. It's just kind of a code organization thing. It tends to help when you have to go hunt these things. So, an event listener, click. And this is going to start out just like our numbers bit. So we're going to do if not event.target.matches button return. So we'll only do buttons. Okay, and now this time we called it operator. So on our data set, we're going to have an operator. So for now, so when we click an operator, so we've typed in 79. When we click an operator, it doesn't actually do anything right away usually. Like if we use the Windows calculator as an example, 789 plus. So it shows this up here, but we're not showing that. We're emulating those little cheap calculators that everyone had in the 90s. If you're not old enough to remember or have even existed in the 90s, they were about this big and they were terrible. They still are around sometimes, but because everyone has a smartphone now, they don't need them. Yeah, so we'll do 789. When we hit the plus sign, though, doesn't really change until we hit a new number. So we'll do 6 now, and it resets our value. So we're going to emulate that. So for now, let's just stash which operator it was in a variable somewhere. So let's make a new variable. So let operator, and we don't need to set a default value for it because it's going to be here. So operator equals event.target, so the button we click, dataset.operator. And we'll console log that to make sure it actually works. Okay, so 9 plus, and it did output that, or we can do minus, or multiply, or divide. And now, one thing we want to do is say you just load this up and we hit plus. We have an option. We could say 0. We could go ahead and use that 0 and say plus. And then if we did 9, it would be 0 plus 9. Let's see what the window calculates. Actually, no. So that's 0. Hit plus. Okay, so it does exactly what I just described. So we'll do that too. We add the operator. So now let's think about this. So we have our current value. We've now hit an operator. So now we're going to next number we're going to want to go on a new value. So instead of putting the new number on a new value, we already have all this code linked with value and displaying the value. Let's keep using value for the current one. Let's stash the other value into here. And so we're going to call it, so just in case you don't know, we have operators. When you have a map from like 1 plus 2, the operator everyone knows. Not everyone knows, but the bits, the numbers, the things you're doing the operation on are called operands. So we're going to call this variable the first operand. And we won't initialize it. Let's get rid of that because that's not code that good. So the first operand. So when we add the operator, we're also going to stash the current value into first operand. Okay. So and let's go ahead. We'll console log first operand as well. Okay. So 9 plus, and so 9 and add. Cool. All right. So now we need to on the next number click, we're going to reset our value. And now one way we could do this, kind of a sneaky way, is we could take advantage of the fact that every time we change a value, it doesn't show immediately unless we call that function. We could just sneakily set value to 0, and then it would actually work. The problem with that, though, is one, it's not super obvious that that's what it's trying to do. But the other is like if I use the Windows calculator, it's an example again. So 9 plus, so I hit the plus sign. And if I hit minus, notice it holds 9 and then it does minus. By console log all 3 of these. First operand, operator value. So 9 plus. So that's looking good. We have 9, add, and 0. But now if I want to hit minus, look what happens. Because that function copies over that value and we secretly, sneakily stuck the value into there, it's now awkward because, oh, we just cleared out our first operand. So that's not what we want. So instead of, we could do something clever, but a lot of times clever is just code for confusing. So let's not do that. What we'll do instead is we're going to create a Boolean, and we'll say clear value on next. We'll call it that. And we'll set it to false down there, and we'll set it to true down here. Okay. So now so this hasn't blanked up the value. So these two are the same. So up here now, or actually, we'll do it in add number, because add number is really the one that changes value for us now. So up in add number, we're going to check for that. So if clear value on next, then we're going to do value equals 0, so we'll reset back to 0, and we'll also turn value on next off, because we don't want to keep doing it over and over. So when we hit an operator, we turn it on. When we type the next number, we're going to blank, then we're going to blank out value and turn it off. So now, I keep deleting the console log and putting it back. It's a little bit long for now. First operand, operator, value. And actually, put that up here too. Just copy paste it. just so we can kind of see what's going on there. And actually, there's another way to see things under the hood too. If you open up your code, we can actually do breakpoints as well. So this is kind of the high-tech version of console logging. So what breakpoints will break whenever the code gets to a certain spot, and we'll be able to see what's in there. So, all right, so I'm going to type 9. No, oh, the breakpoint's not in the right spot anymore. Notice the breakpoint's tied to the line, and because I changed the code, I need to move my breakpoint. Let's try that again. There we go. See how it paused in debugger, and it highlights what line we're on, and we can see all the variables inside of here. Well, so we can see our current value and blah, blah, blah. So we'll hit this button, and I'll continue. I'm going to do plus, and so it broke down here now. So that's move down here. Okay. And so now we can see first operand is 99, our value is 99, and our operator is add. So that's what we want. We'll hit play, and we're going to. And now we're going to hit 6, and so now we're here. And it hasn't actually called this yet, so we don't see the 6 yet, but we can now see our data is all set. So we have value there. We still have our 99 here. We have add, so that's good. And now let's refresh 9 plus, and let's make sure that now when we hit minus, we still have our first operand set right. Perfect. So, and now we have. So you could do it this way too. I know a lot of people like them. The reason I tend to like console logs is just because they're quick and you don't have to hit play a million times. Sometimes I'll use the debugger, but usually only for more complicated bits. And I'll stick with console logs just for the easy stuff. Because you can also ignore console logs. Like it was console logging that whole time too. We weren't looking at them. So, you know, multiple tools in your toolbox, different reasons. Different times they're good and bad, and just straight up references. So now we have that. So now, so that's pretty much it for our operators, actually. So, whoops, sorry about that, guys. There we go. So now we pretty much have our operator all set. We have our values. So now we can do, say, 9 plus 6.3. And then we don't have equal yet, so we didn't console out. Okay, so now let's go ahead and implement our equal sign. So equal, just like the clear button, it's its own thing. So we're going to give it an ID equal. We're going to, I'm going to clump it with something that's kind of similar to it, so clear element. Document query selector equal. And then again, keep this clump of stuff in the same order as this clump of stuff. Equal element, add event listener, click. And just like clear element, I don't need the event thing because it's equal is always going to do the same thing. Okay, so now what equal will do is so now at this point we have first operand, which has the left side of our operation. And then we have operator, which is our operator, and we have value, which has our second operator. So now we're going to do the operation. So we really, we have 4 possible operators, so we've stashed what the operator is, and here we just actually do the math. So we're going to use a switch statement. We're going to say operator, and then we'll say case add. And so if we add, then value equals first operand plus value, and then break. We have subtract value equals first operand minus value, and break is multiply value equals first operand times value. Remember JavaScript, well, pretty much all programming languages use the asterisk for the multiply. And value equals first operand divide by value. Okay, so that updates our value. Now we need to do a little cleanup. So let's blank out first operand. We don't need it, so we'll set that to 0. let's also blank out our operator because we just used it. We'll set that back to undefined. It's just nothing. You could do null too, but technically we defaulted to undefined. Actually, defaulted back to undefined too. So leave that too. And then we'll call update value display to actually show it. Well, I'm keeping that open. Nice. There we go. Okay. So, whoops, we blew up. Cannot read properties null if undefined. So let's hit that. The one is equal element is undefined. Oh, no, yeah, equal. So it's saying cannot read properties null, or cannot read properties of null. So that means the thing to the left of this is null. So equal element is null. So I messed up here. So we have equal element is equal to equal. What did I call it here? ID equal. Huh. Actually looks right. So it's console.log equal element here. Equal element. Type on this. Alright, so let's do console log. Huh. No, we do have the element here. Oh, that's weird. Huh. I don't know what I did. Somehow we ended up with something funny. Okay. Never mind. Also line. That might be because of my little pipeline. I may have hit it too soon. Okay. So now, let's see. 9 plus 6 equals 15. Yay! Minus 4 equals yay. Times 3 equals yay. Divide by 2 equals yay. Alright, so it kind of works. So now, well, one last little bit we'll do. Oh, actually, so two little bits. So first, if we're over here, a couple things actually happen. If we say we do 9 plus 9 and I hit plus again, it goes ahead and does the operator and also sets up that. So let's mimic that. So in here, we'll check if operator. So if operator just means if we have an operator at all. If it's anything but undefined or null or false or zero or any other false number. So if we have an operator, let's go ahead and let's move our equal logic. We won't grab the update value. We'll just do that. We'll do, we'll call it function, let's call it solve or resolve. I'll call it solve. And that's just going to do the equal math, basically. So we'll, before we do the setting of stuff, we're going to just call solve. And then, oh, and actually, since we don't have the update value, let's go ahead, we'll move the update into here. And then this guy's just going to call solve. Okay, so now, let's first test the equal sign, because I changed that, make sure it still works. Good. And now we'll do, oops, so that's one thing we need to do here. 9 plus 9 plus, okay, there we go, and 6 equals, okay, so cool. So that bit works. So now the bit I just said we need to do. So we need to also do, if we just got an equation and we don't hit an operator, so let's look at the Windows one again. So 9 plus 9 equals, and then I just hit 8, it clears it out again, it doesn't do that. Which is actually different than if I do, or no, 9 plus 9, but yeah, it is the same. So if I just had an equal, then it should also clear value on next. So we already have all that clear value on next logic. Let's just pop that into solve as true, because we will. And then in the operator, yeah, it's the same thing all the time. So yeah, so now it's just redundant, so we can get rid of that one because it's the same for that end. So 9 plus 9, 9, oh, nope, not redundant because we don't call solve. So we're gonna, we can leave it in both places. We could just put it down in there. It's up to you. We'll just, we'll have it in both places. So technically we're setting it to true twice, same time. That's okay. So 9 plus 9 equals, and then I didn't hit an operator, so it should clear. Yay, okay. And 9 plus 9 plus There we go. Perfect. Okay, and then that's it. Oh, yeah. So that's pretty much it. So we now have a working calculator. So we've got our. Just getting checked. We did that already. We did that with numbers. We did our operators, and we did our equal sign. So we've met all of our requirements for our program. So technically we're done. Yay. A couple things. Let's go clean up a little bit. So one thing that's good to do, if you're dealing with strings as like tokens, I guess, um, it's good if you, instead of typing them directly, put the values in some variable. That way, because like my IDE doesn't know if, well, it does because it's a typo, but like, if it's supposed to be add versus add or something, my IDE can't help me because it doesn't know what the string is supposed to be. If I, however, let's make an operators object, and we'll say add, and these are just going to kind of be constant, subtract, multiply, divide. I only have to make sure now that I get it spelled right here, and then down here, I'm going to swap this out to operators.add, operators.subtract. And again, this is calculated as a simple example, but in other programs where you're, maybe using these a bunch, you have to worry about it more. And so this can really help you, because if you have a typo here, your IDE is going to be able to help you. It's like, I don't know what that is. So we can see unresolved variable. So typos get fixed easier here. And so I only have one place I can, I don't have only one place I can screw up typing the string now. And so I just can be very careful there, and then I don't have to worry so much else. Unfortunately, we can't do much about the type strings here, so you just have to be careful there. If you were using a framework or something, you can probably use code to get it in there, so you don't have to do it. But if we're kind of keeping it simple and not using a real framework, we just want to make sure that these match. And then the other thing is, so I could do like this, and this is totally fine, and it works and it makes sense. It gets a little more complicated if you start having lots of operators. We'd have like, if I had like, 20 operators. I had like 20 operators. That's kind of hard to read there. That's kind of ugly and confusing and annoying. So instead what we'll do, let's go up here and let's make another thing. And we're going to call, so those are operators. Let's call these operations, or operations works, or let's call them solvers. Since we call this function solvers, we'll use solvers. What we're going to do here, for each one of these, we're going to make the key be our operator. So operators.add, and whenever you use a variable as the key, you gotta wrap it in square brackets. That's how it knows it's an operator. And then for now, we're just going to, I'm just going to put some blank arrow functions in here. Subtract, multiply, just so I can type them all out. Operator. Okay, and now what we'll do is, instead of the switch statement now, we can replace all this, and we're going to do solvers operator. So that's going to get the correct function to solve the operator. And then, so this is a function, and I'm going to just, I have two ways to do this. I can either just grab these from the global scope and not pass anything in, or I can pass them in. I'm going to choose to pass them in, because if you did like unit testing or something, passing them in makes it a lot easier to test rather than having to worry about trying to get into the global scope. So we're going to pass them in. So up here, and I'm going to just call these A and B, which normally one-letter variables are not good. But when you have a simple function like this, and we just have two of the same thing, and the same things don't really have great names, um, I think A and B is just fine. If you really don't like it, you could call it like first operand and last operand. Um, but as you can see, that's kind of weird. So I'm going to stick with A and B. And then here, I'm going to, so I can do return A plus B, or since it's an arrow function with only one line that returns, I can just skip the curly bracket and the return and the semicolon and just do AB. So I'm going to repeat that, A minus B, A times B, A divided by B. Okay, so, okay. So, and just to reiterate now, so what we'll do when I hit solve, it's going to go find the solver for the appropriate operand. I'm going to pass in the first operand and the second operand, which is value, and we're going to resolve it, and we're going to return the value. So we'll do value equals, like that, and that's it. So now it's clean, and now if I wanted to add 50 million operators, it's just one, or, it may be more lines, but it's a lot easier to read and manage and add more to this style than it is, the switch statement from hell that's 800 lines long. So yeah, and then, honestly, I think that's about it. I think we've pretty much done it. So we've met all of our requirements. We have a decent style. Our designer would yell at us, and we'd have to fix the design. There's not a super great design, but good enough for now. Certainly good enough if you're your own designer and you're not a designer like me. And we met all of our requirements. So each of our requirements we've done. So yay, we completed a calculator. And yeah, so we can just kind of play with it. Press again. Just 3 times 3 divide by 2 equals. Oh, and let's see what happens. Let's make sure. Okay, so 0.5. Okay, so that's good. That's what we want to happen there. And let's check. Let's do 6 plus 6 equals. And I'm going to hit dot, and it should clear. It didn't clear. So let's check that. Testing is always good. Always something new. So let's see. So what happened? So we ended up in equal. We hit solve. Solve set the value. We have clear value on next, which is right. So let's check. We may not. The clear value on next. Value is 0. New number. Add number, but we did a dot. Okay, so when we solved, we didn't actually call new number yet. We just solved, and then I hit update value. And then we hit dot, so we're down here, and we're down here. So we did had unused decimal true. Clear on next is still also true. Okay. So we update the value, so we update the value, or we call update value display. So we ended up rendering this. So I bet if I hit a number, we're going to switch to 0.9. Yep. So what we want to do here is, let's go ahead. Where do we want to stick that? So let's stick that in decimal. So we'll go ahead and we'll check for if it has unused decimal, or not unused decimal. If clear value on next, we'll go ahead and handle that here. And let's go ahead. So the code would be exactly the same. We want to be dry. We want to try not to repeat ourselves. Sometimes it's unavoidable. In this case, I think, though, we can extract this bit into its own function. So let's call it clear if needed, and let it check if it's in this state, if this is turned on, and if so, it'll do it. And then we just need to call it, and we can call it regardless. So if it needs to clear it, it'll do that. If it doesn't need to clear it, it won't do anything. So then we can just call that same function here. Clear if needed, clear if needed. Okay, so let's see if that works. So 9 plus 9 equals decimal. There we go. 6. All right, we're not going to worry about this problem right now, but this is JavaScript being kind of a jerk to us. Um, Occasionally you get these goofy rounding issues like this, and it happens a lot. It's not super complicated to do, but we want to call it done on this. But basically, this is a rounding error because of how floats are stored. Sometimes you get these goofy things like that. So this can pretend we didn't see that every single time. Oh well, we'll pretend it doesn't. 3.6 probably works. Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, so I think this is good. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to hop on over to. Oops, pin tab. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'll make a new repo to support dash calculator in. Call it calculator. Calculator stream. Create repo. Creating. There we go. Copy this. Okay. So, and because I cloned the basic web repo, the origin is still the origin, which is where it pushes up to, basically the URL where it pushes up to, is still set to the basic web. So we're going to do git remote remove origin. We're going to remove the origin. Then I'm going to add back on the new one. Git remote add origin and paste in that repo I have, or the URL I have. I'm going to type git status. And again, if you don't know, and like you don't even need to deal with Git, honestly. You can just straight up download from Git too if you want to do that. Git's a good skill to learn, but you can learn it after you've got programming down. But you can also use the UI if you want. I just type in stuff. So we're going to do git add dot to add all the things we updated. Type git status again. They're all green. That means they get added when I commit. Git commit, and I'm going to do dash a, which won't actually do anything since I just added git dot add dot dash a will add things as well, but it doesn't add new files. That's why we call it git add dot. And then I'm going to do m, which is a message, and we'll just call this initial commit, or we'll say let's name it created calculator. Okay, git status, nothing there. Good. We're going to push it up, and because I changed origin, it's going to yell I need to set the upstream. So I'm going to do git push. And you can do dash dash set hyphen upstream like it has right here. Or you can do dash view, which is the short version of that. It's the same thing. Origin master, just like set tells me to. And then git status. Okay, so it's pushed up. Now I'll refresh the page. Refresh. And there it is. So now if you want to check out the code, you can check it out here. If you want to download it, you can use Git, or like I said, you can just download it directly. Yeah, download zip. You can just download zip if you want and pretend Git doesn't exist for now, which is absolutely fine when you're a beginner or even intermediate program. So yeah, so if you want to check out the code, you can do that. If you want to build your own, you can go for that. You can clone the basic web template if you want to use my web template. You can even download the calculator we made, try to add buttons to it, do whatever. Let me know if you have questions. Hit the Discord, hit me next time I'm streaming here. Leave a comment on YouTube. I'll post this video on YouTube sometime in the next little bit after I get it cleaned up. Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining me. Hopefully you learned a bit. All right. Till next time, guys. See ya.